Chris, welcome to the podcast. I want to introduce you with your full name because it's exciting. Chris Tarzan Clemens. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm happy to be here. I give presentations sometimes, and typically I open up by saying, no, my mom did not give me the middle name Tarzan. My official middle name is something else, but for about a decade now, I've gone by Tarzan.
I like it, and we are very quickly going to get into where that name came from. I'm excited to hear the story, but as an introduction to yourself, now you are a wide-ranging outdoorsman, but if I were to give it a shot, I would say kind of moved away from a traditional corporate career to go pursue traveling, cycling, running, basically everything outdoors. How do you introduce yourself when you're giving presentations?
Normally I kind of open with my name's Chris and I'm homeless. I'm probably not actually homeless right now. I'm living in my truck camper that I live in when I'm in North America. But I have been houseless since 2015, so that means I'm rentless and mortgageless, which is pretty nice.
Okay, well, let's start at the beginning, or at least the beginning as I know it, leaving a corporate career to go pursue more outdoor adventures. What was the impetus and what was the drive for that?
I'm not actually sure. I feel like I kind of fell into it. Some of my friends say they always knew this about me, but I look back and I think I was pretty normal for a long time. I grew up in Indiana. Graduated college, got my first job, and the company that I worked for sent me to Santa Barbara, California. So I got pretty lucky moving out to the West Coast, which is very outdoorsy. But I wasn't doing a lot in nature. I've always been a runner in college, and then after college I ran a lot of marathons. But I didn't do any trail running or anything like that. I did some bicycling. But I was here for about 6 years, and then I was with friends up in Yosemite National Park, two of my best friends from college, and we hiked up Half Dome. And we were standing on the top of Half Dome, and we can't remember who said it, but someone said, maybe we should quit our jobs and hike the Appalachian Trail. And at the time, I don't think I really knew much about the Appalachian Trail, but the job that I was at, I was pretty ready to do something different. So I thought that it'd be pretty cool, and it ended up me and one of the other guys. Then a couple months later, we both quit our jobs and flew over to Atlanta, Georgia, and then set out on the Appalachian Trail, and that was in 2012.
I like that you jumped on the opportunity, not knowing. I mean, did you know that the Appalachian Trail was going to take months to hike at the time?
Yeah, so I started looking into it, and I had done a little bit of backpacking, but never on my own. My brother and I grew up together, and our aunt and uncle lived in Arizona, and they were always pushing us to do outdoor stuff. And they had taken us on a 4-day Grand Canyon, rim to rim to rim backpacking trip, but they organized everything, so I knew nothing about backpacking. And actually, in 2012, at the time, I was here in Santa Barbara, had a normal career. I was going to be the future president of the Rotary Club of Santa Barbara, youngest president, and I was even married. And so I had to clear this with my wife at the time to let me go take 6 months, and she was so supportive of it. At one point I thought, most guys can't get a hall pass for a weekend. If she's going to let me go hike for 6 months, I'm pretty sure I'm going to have to go do this.
Yeah, that's a delicate conversation. And I found, not married, but I find my girlfriends take my adventures. It's kind of luck of the draw, depending. Their response varies. Maybe is the best way to say it.
Exactly.
Now, did you do a lot of preparation to do a 6-month hike like this, or did you feel like you had the gear dialed, the training ready?
Looking back, I definitely could have done more preparation. I think I had it in mind to do that, but I ended up just watching YouTube videos of other hikers that did the trail just every night. I should have been thinking a little bit more about gear, but I went with 2 other buddies, my best friend from college and a guy, the retired superintendent of the school system in Santa Barbara. He had just retired. And after I told him I was going to do this trek, the next morning his wife texted me and said, "Can Brian go with you?" So he's very outdoorsy, and he was perfect for this, but I'm not sure. Maybe Ann was just trying to get him out of the house a little bit too. But he brought a lot of knowledge about gear. So he helped us figure out a lot with calories and food and drop bags and all this kind of stuff. And I actually went out, I bought a backpack from REI online. I never even tried it on. So first day on the trail, I was way overpacked. I had like 47 pounds or something on my back. And then I realized that the hip belt didn't even fit. So all that weight was on my shoulders. And in the first week, we stopped at another outfitter. I bought a whole new backpack. So I learned a lot along the way. That was how I learned most about backpacking.
That's quite the trial by fire. Although, what are your thoughts on this? I find a lot of people that I talk to on this podcast who go for these big objectives, frankly, are pretty unprepared when they go and set off. I never want to tell people to get in over their head. That being said, there seems to be something there where the adventure happens because you maybe force it to happen a little bit.
Yeah, if you wait till you have everything perfectly dialed, you'll probably never go, right? And luckily, the Appalachian Trail is very forgiving. And if you read other books and accounts of people hiking the ATs, people go out there with very, very little preparation, but you can make it happen. And I've also found that is kind of the most interesting way to do it. I mean, I was just in Thailand for a year and a half during the pandemic, and I was getting bored on the little island I was living on. So I bought a $200 bicycle and some touring gear, and then just rode about, I don't know, 1,600 or 2,000 miles on this cheap bike. I'd done some bike touring before with the best of the best, borrowing all this gear from my friends, and I found that, cheap and just really easy gear is often the best solution.
Well, it is a solution, right? So you gotta take what you could get often.
Yeah.
Now I'm assuming that the name Tarzan comes from the trail name on the AT.
Yep. Everybody gets a trail name on long trails. You're kind of not supposed to pick your own name. So typically you just pop out there, and it could be a couple days or a couple weeks. Something will happen where whoever you're hiking with will give you a trail name. Now, you don't always want that trail name. I hiked with some other guys. It was one of my good buddies was Smiling Joe, but he just had a big, massive smile on his face every day. There was another guy I hiked with. His name was Rat Bucket. It was because one of the early nights on the trail, he had a collapsible water bucket, and he would fill that at the water source each night. And in the morning, he could just filter it really quick and put it in his pack. But, one night he had it hanging in a tree, and a rodent kind of climbed in to get a drink and then never made it back out and died in it. So his name for the rest of eternity now is Rat Bucket. So I was hiking with two of my good buddies early on down in maybe Georgia, North Carolina, and one of the guys said, with my long hair, I kind of looked like Tarzan swinging through the trees up ahead. So I thought Tarzan was a pretty good one, and I adopted it pretty quick.
That's what I was going to say, that the names seem to range from tolerable to much less than tolerable, maybe.
Yeah.
And I really like yours. I find a lot of them come from like the rodent in the water story is kind of like a less than ideal trail name scenario.
Yes, exactly. Tarzan seems to be doing pretty well.
That's right. As far as nicknames go, you kind of lucked out there. Now, during the trail, it sounds like it started off pretty challenging, and you made some adjustments. Were you able to? I guess my concern or my thought process would be that this is so far, it's so hard, and maybe you didn't set out with the right amount of gear. But it must have ended, or somewhere along the line, the experience must have gotten dramatically better to sort of keep you in the outdoors and, maybe away from the corporate world, if you will.
Yeah, it was interesting. I'd been out of school and in my career for 6 years, and it was they even offered to let me save my job and take it back up when I got back. But I really wanted to leave and just kind of try something different. And in my mind, I thought I'd hike for 6 months, get to the top of Mount Katahdin, and have everything figured out with what I want to do with the rest of my life. And in reality, I got up there and I had more questions than answers. But I knew for sure when I finished the trail that I didn't really want to go back to just living a normal life. I loved the challenge of mentally and physically, the challenge of every day on the Appalachian Trail. I loved that. Don't get me wrong, I was ready for a warm bed and a hot shower, but I felt so alive on the AT. And then you combine that, it's such a social trail that just meeting different people from different walks of life every day and sharing stories was incredible. Some of my best friends now, that while I'm traveling, I stop and see them, they're all from the AT, even if I just hiked with them for maybe a day. And then I had not been really to most of those states along the East Coast. So in 2,000 miles, I got to see so many new places, new towns, cultures, even within the United States. Every place is a little bit different. So I came home, I knew I wanted to physically challenge myself more. I wanted the freedom to be traveling around to see different things. I wanted the freedom to really own my time. So when I got home, I didn't know how to do that. It took me a couple years to get this lifestyle going, but I knew for sure I didn't want to go back to being normal.
I like how you phrase that. Now, I've got this theory, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. It's not a theory, maybe more of an observation, that as far as through hiking goes, it seems like in the U.S., right, you've got kind of the three major ones. But I find that people who grew up on the eastern side of the U.S. tend to gravitate towards the AT. It's close to home, but it's, like you said, the opportunity to explore new things. And similarly on the West Coast, people who grow up on the West Coast tend to favor the PCT. Has that been your thought? Do you have any thoughts on that, or has that been your observation as well?
It's interesting because I've had a lot of people ask why we did the AT. Myself and Ryan, the two of us that went and hiked this, we were both living in California at the time. So it almost would have made more sense to do the PCT, especially because we had friends and family around that could have helped. But I don't know. I'm glad that I did the AT. I think at the time I really enjoyed the social aspect of it. The PCT sounds amazingly beautiful, a lot more rugged, and it would have been a lot more difficult for me to go in so unprepared. I don't know that I'm going to go do the PCT because then I'm going to have to go do the CDT as well. You can't just have 2 out of 3. But people ask often, which they want to go do a long trail, what is my suggestion? And from what my understanding, the AT is very social. So if you're looking for that social side of it and a very forgiving trail, the AT is awesome. If you want big views, big rugged mountains and wilderness, probably the PCT. And if you want a seriously personal challenge, probably the CDT.
That is the most eloquent and succinct description of all 3. I think that's a great way to frame the 3 big hikes, all overwhelming. Now, after the AT, it seems like you transitioned in a maybe more serious capacity to ultra running. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah. So like I said, I had done a lot of marathons, and my brother and I had always done road racing, but I hiked with my best friend for about the first half of the AT. We did 3 months to about the halfway mark, and then he had to go home for a quick visit, so I kind of kept moving, and then I fell in step with some other hikers that were pretty quick hikers, and I really enjoyed kind of pushing myself. So I did the second half of the AT in about a month and a half, and toward the end of it, I was with Rafiki and JD, these 2 other kids, and we were pushing up to like 35, 40 miles a day. We did the 100-mile wilderness in 2.5 days. And I really loved that the physical challenge of hiking big miles. And at that point, I'm hiking over a 50-kilometer, distance with a full backpack on my back. So coming back to California, I started looking up some ultramarathons and found the Bulldog 50K in the Santa Monica Mountains down in Malibu Creek State Park. And you actually have to have a qualifier to get into the 50K, or you did at the time, but I didn't have one. But I contacted the race director and said, I'm doing this on the Appalachian Trail. I'm covering this many miles a day. Can I come down and run your race? So that was only a month or 2 after I finished the AT. My brother and I went down there, ran our first 50-kilometer race together. It hurt really bad, but we got pretty addicted to it. Eventually, we ran our first 100-kilometer race together. We've run a 100-mile race together, and it just kind of spiraled out of control from there.
I feel like there's a lot of these stories where you're coming from like a pretty serious physical fitness background, but you have to contact the race director to get into these races. Seems to be a trend in the ultra running sphere.
Yep.
I guess maybe it's that it's hard, and maybe now it's perhaps a little bit easier, but maybe at the time harder to get direct experience from. There were only so many ultra races available.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think now there are so many options. I've only done a few more races where I kind of needed a qualifier, but even at that point, I think if I just reached out to the director and said, "This is what I've done the past 10 years," I think there's a lot of muscle memory for pain endurance and pain thresholds. So even if I haven't been doing like 100-mile training lately, I could probably still pop out and do some distance.
Okay. Fair enough. You don't lose it, right? Or that sense of the pain tolerance maybe is the best way to say that.
Yep.
Now, When you're doing these races, are you motivated for personal achievement? Are you trying to beat other competitors? What's driving you to do this?
Well, I'm not fast. I'm never going to podium. So I'm not real competitive with other people, but I am competitive with myself. I like toward the end on the AT, that it made no difference to go pop out 35 or 40 miles in a day, but I just wanted to see if I could do it. Since then I've done the Camino de Santiago, and I just went over there and I did 50 kilometers a day there. So I didn't get to really meet anyone because I was kind of doing about a day and a half of what everyone else was doing in each day. So normally it's more just about challenging myself. I think the last 100-mile race I did, and probably the only one I'd ever want to do again, is the Plain 100. It's up in Washington State, and most people don't know anything about this race, but it's regularly ranked one of the hardest ultramarathon races in the world. It's over 100 miles, completely unmarked trails, no aid, no pacers. You can't get any support, and you have to carry all your own food, get all your own water. So completely self-supported 100-miler, and that was a pretty wild experience. When you hit those low moments out there and there's no one around to help you, you just got to depend on yourself.
So if there's no aid and it's unmarked, are you handling navigation by yourself?
Yeah, I think in subsequent years there's probably a GPS track, and so now with the GPS devices, it's probably a little bit easier. At that time, this was in 2017 or 18, I believe. I did it with just a paper map, and luckily with this lifestyle of freedom that I have, I went up to the area a few weeks before, and I did a 2-day backpacking trip. And I took the map out there, I took a highlighter, and I took my camera. And at every trail intersection, I made sure I was going the right direction. I took a picture of it. So leading up to the race, I just flipped through those pictures, so I knew where to go. And there were about 30 people out there, so you can kind of fall in along with someone for a little while, but most of the race you're really on your own.
Did you find that navigation and just everything gets harder? I mean, right with your hours into this race, that it becomes quite a challenge in itself.
Especially at night, the sun goes down, you got 40 miles left, you're out there in the middle of nowhere, the woods gets kind of spooky. It was funny. I was behind a group of a few people. I was never close enough to see them, but I knew they were in front of me because one of the guys wasn't taking a break to go, pee off the side of the trail. He was just kind of peeing while he was walking, because I could see the little line of water on the ground. And then all of a sudden he stopped peeing or something. So for a mile or two, I saw no tracks, and I thought for sure that I was lost. I was pulling out my phone, trying to find a map or anything. I thought for sure I was out of the race. And then not long after, I came around the corner and there were the 3 people. I don't know why he stopped, but scared the heck out of me.
I like that. You got to use whatever breadcrumbs you find.
Yep.
That's very resourceful
exactly.
of you. Yeah. It sounds like you didn't make the comment to him, but that would have been an interesting comment.
Yeah, I don't think
say what's going on.
I don't think I was feeling funny at the time. That was we had on that course. They do have National Forest representatives out there, and you do have to check in with them just for safety, but they're not allowed to help you at all. So not long after that, we walked up to the last ranger check-in, and the group of 3 continued on, but I was so tired. It was so cold. I just laid down. The 2 forest rangers are sitting in a truck. Truck's turned on. They're blasting the heat because it's so cold out, and I just had to lay down on the ground. Fell asleep for about 15 minutes until I was too cold, and then just got up and kept staggering along.
Now that's a common theme of a lot of the racers that I've talked to, is that you get to the point where you're so exhausted you have to sleep, and the signal to keep going is when you get too cold.
Yep.
To go.
Yep.
Now you kind of have really alluded to, I guess, what I would call a roller coaster of emotions on these adventures. Do you find that are you somebody with the mentality that has like a real even steady state, or do you get thrown by these elations and low points?
So first, I think I definitely do these endurance challenges or adventures because I do love the serious highs, and the serious lows make life really interesting, and they make all the lows make the highs way more enjoyable, and you earn them. I think over the years I've gotten better at managing my emotions. I know in my first 100-mile race I had 2 crew members and pacers there to help me. They were they're from the ultra world, running world, so they knew what to expect and how to crew and pace. But Maria Walton, she was my pacer in the night, I think from maybe mile 70 to 90 or something. And I was having a really low, this race was back in Ohio, the Burning River 100, and it was all muddy and the trail was horrible and it was dark out. And Maria's seriously a cheerleader. She's trying to cheer me up. And I'm just like, Maria, don't talk to me. I don't want to hear it. Just get behind me. Just don't talk. And the next day after I finished the race, we were sitting around having a beer, and I was thinking all these negative emotions and negative thoughts, like literally just shut up, Maria. But I didn't think I said any of that stuff. And then she brought up everything that I was thinking. I was like, oh, I was pretty bad. But, you know, Maria and Jess, they've been around ultra runners for a long time, so they took it really well. But I think since that one, I've gotten a little bit better about checking my emotions.
I love it. I love it. It's hard to hide stuff, I guess, when you're you know, kind of that put up against it. Now, when you get to the low points throughout these races, do you think about abandoning? What is that thought process like?
No, I guess I think maybe kind of the AT and some of these longer adventures just kind of instilled in me that if you just keep going, you don't have to go fast. And again, I'm not trying to win this race. I'm not going to go home with any hardware other than what every finisher gets. So I've found that if I just at least slow down and just keep moving, even if it's a lot slower, most of the, if you're in a race, the cutoff times are pretty good. Like you should be able to make it even if you're going slow. And I've never been in a situation where I've been injured enough or really had to step off because I was going to hurt myself, you know, long term. But that would be something to consider and think about.
That's interesting. Yeah, that call out, right? That just maybe changing your pace a little bit can make a dramatic difference in terms of, you know, your mentality and maybe the resources that you're consuming. Now, are you somebody who at the start of a race like this is real excited and takes off fast, or do you have an even pace from the beginning?
Normally on a longer race, I'll take off slow. I'd rather do some sort of a negative split, or at least give myself a chance to speed up later in the race. But like even looking at playing, I finished pretty slow at the end too, and my knees were pretty bad coming down out of those mountains on those. There was all pretty much like dirt bike trail, and you're just trudging through churned up sand and stuff. It was pretty hard, pretty horrible. If I went back there again, I think I'd try and take off a little bit faster in the beginning because it's a lot more runnable. Try and cover some more ground, you know, maybe the first half of the race or at least during the daylight. But I don't think too much strategically about it. I mostly just kind of listen to my body, and if I'm feeling good, then I'll run a little bit faster. And especially with ultras, I typically don't run uphill. That's my opportunity to kind of hike. And some of the bicycle touring I've done recently, especially in Thailand, sometimes I didn't ride uphill just because I couldn't. So I had to get off and hike anyway. So
the hike a bike is I'm very familiar with with that concept. So I feel your pain on that one.
Yep.
Now I'm curious, you've been doing ultras for many years now. Have you seen the population, the participation levels change quite a bit over that time?
I think it's definitely a lot more popular. And I do have to say, I'm not real involved in racing. I was for a little while, but my preference is more kind of fat ass style, or just getting together with friends and going out and doing a challenge. But back in 2013, 14, this would have been right after the AT, when my brother and I got into ultra running. We fell in with a group here in Santa Barbara County in Santa Maria that was out just doing races all the time. My buddy Luis Escobar was a race director for some ultras and trail races, and there was a good core group here between Ventura, Santa Barbara, and Santa Maria that almost every single weekend we were out camping, dirt bagging, and running on some trail around Southern California or over in the Grand Canyon or up around Yosemite or out in Ridgecrest. That at that time it got really popular, and my brother and another one of our friends, they even started Dirtbag Runners, this running brand company. So it really kind of exploded for a couple of years, and that's when I was doing a little bit more of the racing. The last couple of years, I haven't done much racing, but I've been helping my brother. He ran Western States recently, and So when I go to those bigger events with him, I can see the popularity and more people. And a lot of those races are harder and harder to get into. So it's definitely becoming more popular.
Do you think that's a net positive? I mean, are you happy to see kind of more interest, or is it something that, you know, you feel like maybe is best kept to these elite athletes?
No, I think it's super cool. And really, even if you think about the elite athletes, there hasn't been a lot of good money in ultra running, at least. But the more of the masses that come to this sport, then there's going to be more and more money, you know, from the brands for these elite runners. So that's pretty cool. It's going to make it a lot more sustainable for some of those front runners. And yeah, it's cool. I mean, here in Santa Barbara, there's just so many beautiful trails right behind town, and it's nice to think that more and more people are going to go out there and experience nature, and then hopefully protect nature. And even though I don't necessarily want to go to all these big name races and go run with a couple thousand people, it's cool enough that we're going to keep this sport going, and I can go find my own small little niche races on the side.
Now, you bring up the topic of money, so let's jump into that a little bit, because, you know, as you say, this world doesn't pay too much, and now the concept of being a content creator or an influencer, I think is pretty well established. That being said, I think while you're on social media, it seems like it's not the biggest priority of yours. So I'm just curious to hear how you're funding this lifestyle.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't post a lot about it, but I do work. I actually work for the same company that I worked for before the Appalachian Trail. It's a capital equipment, bakery equipment company making automated machines. Basically, we sell cheesecake cutting machines. That's what I did out of school, and that's what I still do. But I've been in the baking industry for a long time, and I'm freelancing for this company and a few others in our industry, managing marketing programs. I build and manage websites for them, social media, newsletters, videos, trade show prep, and freelancing for them I've been doing since, I think, 2015. It gives me the complete freedom to work from anywhere. So as long as I have my laptop and an internet connection, I can do work for these clients. So that's allowed me to live around the world the last couple of years. Typically, I'm in North America during the summer, and then in the winters, I don't like cold weather. So I've either done South America, Australia, or the last couple of years has been strongly Asia and Thailand.
I like it. And that's awesome that they were so welcoming kind of you pitching an alternative approach, because this is way before coronavirus or this kind of this new work from home mentality.
Yeah, I feel very lucky. I'd really love the food industry and the bakery equipment industry specifically. It's very niche. So a lot of what I'm doing with their marketing campaigns or their website, they could go hire an agency or someone. But unless they really have someone on the inside, and I sold the equipment for 3 years and then I marketed their equipment for 3 years, and I know this industry, I know the players, and I think if they went to go get an agency, they could get someone that has maybe better technical skills than me, but maybe wouldn't know the industry as well. And I knew this is what I wanted to do, so I spent a lot of time on YouTube and Google learning how to use WordPress, how to use Adobe products, and so pretty much everything. I studied marketing in college, but that was, you know, back in the early 2000s, and all the technical stuff that I know now is all self-taught.
Wow. Well, I will definitely, once we're done, pick your brain for some tips and tricks. Using WordPress is no small feat. I find that it's a rather clunky interface, maybe is the best way to say it.
Yep.
Now, you mentioned traveling internationally as well as staying in the U.S. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on, you know, after the AT and now you're doing kind of these ultras and maybe starting to branch out beyond that. Was your main focus to stay in the U.S. or did you want to explore the wider world as well?
I definitely wanted to explore. When I got back from the AT, that was the idea. Is I had read about some other people doing digital nomad stuff, and especially being in like a place like Chiang Mai, Thailand, or maybe the Philippines or Bali. But I really didn't know how to make that work. So when I came back, I didn't have a job. So I actually ended up working at Tiffany & Company for a season, selling really high-end jewelry, wearing a suit every day, coming off the trail. And then I landed at Decker's Outdoor here in Santa Barbara. They own brands like Teva, UGG, Sanuk. So I was working on their events team, and that was my first kind of opening into the outdoor industry. And I thought that I'd really go down that path. But when this opportunity came back with my old client, I got out of the outdoor industry and went back in the baking world. But even that first year, I took off. I was living in a 1985 Volkswagen van at the time in Santa Barbara with a full-time job, but not paying rent, just living on the street. And when I got this freelance job, I spent that summer driving all around the U.S. So I went from Southern California up to Seattle, drove all the way out. I went to Maine, went down to Florida, drove all the way to Key West, and then came all the way back. And somewhere along the lines, in 5 months and 20,000 miles, I knew that I could pay my bills with this freelance income. So with winter coming up, I wanted to try it internationally. It was going to be a challenge, but I was sleeping in a Walmart parking lot. I went into Walmart, I bought a die, and then I got a piece of paper out, and I put 6 countries down on a piece of paper and numbered them 1 to 6. And each country was inexpensive to live in. I read had pretty good Wi-Fi and was warm. So I had these 6 countries, and I rolled the die, and number 6 came up. It was Ecuador. So I just put the van in storage, booked a one-way flight to Ecuador, and spent a couple months in South America.
Wow, that's interesting. That it was so like a little bit like literally a dice roll, if you will, if you will. Now, ironically, we share that in common. I had the opportunity over this pandemic to work remote in Ecuador, so I spent 2 months in Quito.
That's awesome.
Which was such a surprise. I feel a little bit ashamed to say I didn't know too much about the country before going there, but my experience was that it's just a beautiful place and a really fantastic country.
Yeah, beautiful place, beautiful people. It was. I'm looking forward to getting back to Ecuador again sometime soon.
Did you have the opportunity to hike or explore many of the volcanoes?
Not much around Quito. I only stayed there for about 2 weeks, and I started hopping buses. Went down to the Amazon, went out to the coast. My brother flew down, and we did a week out on the Galapagos Islands. And then when I got to southern Ecuador, south of even Cuenca, I was in Vilcabamba, and I stayed there for about 2 weeks, met some other travelers, and we did a lot of hiking around there. And then I jumped in this guy's van. A couple of us went down the Peruvian coast, and then did some hiking in Peru too.
Wow. Now, did you find it hard to manage, given that you're moving around so much, your freelance work with just kind of the realities of traveling?
Yeah, it's a balance, and it's a hard one. First of all, I had to make enough money to pay my bills, so I just had to. But the first couple of years on the road, I was definitely living cheap in cheap hostels, and a lot of times they were party hostels. So everybody's going out every day. They're going to see the sights. They're going out all night, and it took a little bit of work for me to make sure I sat my butt down and worked enough. More recently, when I got stuck in Thailand for the pandemic, I was on a little island, and I was just working from my bungalow, and the entire country locked down, and they opened up pretty quickly in Thailand, and then there was a co-working space on the island, and I joined that for the first time, paying for a spot in a co-working space. And now I think in the future, I'll probably do that in more locations. It gets me in the right place where there's other people working and the energy level is good. And yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear your transition, right? Because at the time, it certainly wasn't as popular or ubiquitous as it is now. And to hear too, I find that is perhaps one of my bigger frustrations when I try to do the digital nomad thing, is that it's hard to complain about anything, but I find that so many people in their head, when I say, hey, I'm going to Costa Rica, they immediately offer all the fun things to do. Yeah, and you kind of have to say, hey, I'm working, but I do get all these opportunities. So you gotta. I found it hard to strike a balance, but it seems like you got yourself there.
Yeah, it's gotten better over the years, but it's hard to make sure you stay focused, especially when everyone around you is on vacation.
Of course. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about the snowman race. This is actually how I found you with your YouTube video of the recon of the snowman race. What is it, and how'd you get involved?
Yeah, the Snowman Race 2022 is a 5-stage ultramarathon in the Kingdom of Bhutan, and this is a country that's in the Himalaya, nestled between Tibet, China, India, Nepal. It's up there and it's remote. And my friend Lewis, who was the race director in Southern California, I've done a lot of racing with him and other photography events. And Lewis and I have just been buddies for a while. Actually, I kind of joke that whenever Lewis calls or texts and says, "Do you want to have an adventure?" you always just have to say yes. So right when I quit my job back in 2015, he did that. And it was because he needed help photographing Scott Jurek on the Appalachian Trail. So Lewis and I went out there and spent the last 2 weeks when Jurek broke the AT record. So last year in, I guess it was July, Lewis texted me and said, "Do you want to have an adventure?" And 5 minutes later, I said yes, and we were booking a flight to Bhutan. So the Kingdom of Bhutan was putting on the snowman race, and the core purpose of it is to bring awareness to climate change, especially in Bhutan. With climate change happening, Bhutan is very high up in the Himalaya, and they're being impacted by the glaciers melting and natural disasters, and it's just something that's very high on their mind. And this race was a way to draw attention to climate change, but also show off Bhutan and the beautiful nature that they have. Lewis was hired as the international race director for the snowman race, and it was going to be happening in October. So I was hired to be one of the course managers. Lewis would be running the entire race, but 5 more of us would be out there on the course. But before we got to the race in October, we needed to have an official GPS track for the runners. So Lewis and I went in August, and we spent 2 weeks with some of the best guiding companies in all of Bhutan, pre-hiking the snowman trek, doing a little bit of course marking, but most importantly, getting this GPS track on both of our watches, and then coming back to make that final course map for all the runners.
Had you heard of the snowman trek independently before all this started?
No, I had never heard of the snowman trek. I had heard of Bhutan, and it was always a place that I wanted to go, but historically and now, it's not easy to get to Bhutan. They value really high-end tourism. So it's something like, I think to even go to the country, you have to pay $200 a day to just be in the country. And then you have to pay for all the other accommodations and guides. So for me, I like to tell people that I kind of choose adventure over income. So I'm slightly hampered by not having a whole lot of income. So going to Bhutan on my own was probably going to be a very difficult process. But getting hired to go to Bhutan was way better.
Well, it always is, right?
Yeah.
Right? As a way to approach things. And now, as I was telling you beforehand too, I feel like I'd vaguely heard of this trek, but it is an incredibly remote trail, correct?
Correct. Yeah, it's regularly said that it's one of the hardest treks in the world. It's typically about a 30-day or about a 1-month hike. We only did about half of the trail for the race. We did the higher part. The trail kind of starts a little bit lower down in the forests and the tropical forests, and it's beautiful the entire way. But for the race, we were doing about 115 or 120 miles of it, and we were picking the second half, which was much higher and more difficult.
Now, given that this is so remote in location and so high up, a little bit of like, I guess I would say, like, from the videos, I mean, it's incredibly beautiful, but it's also pretty inhospitable land, is what I would say. In terms of I'm curious to hear, in terms of the logistics, how did you guys, I know you traveled with a guide company, how did you guys handle like food, water, that sort of thing? And then conversely too, when you had racers on the trail, how was that handled?
Yeah, so we did, I went up on the snowman trek twice. The first time with Lewis and the guides that were going to be working at the race with us in October, we all did the 2-week trek straight through. So when you do something like that, these are professional guiding companies. They have pack animals and handlers, and they bring all the tents and food and a kitchen and everything for you. So it was really good. It was a lot of rice and eggs and stuff. But it is good food, and they take really good care of you. When we went back the second time, now we're going to need to be supporting the runners. So as course managers, there were 4 of us that went out on course. I was in Camp 2. So this was a 5-day stage race, much like the Tour de France. There's the same start and the same finish for everyone. And at the end of the 5 days, whoever has the fastest overall time is the winner. So each day was about a marathon in distance, and then you would arrive at a camp that had all the amenities. So your tent is already there. Our runners did need to carry a sleeping bag, but food is made for you. Everything else is taken care of. So my camp 2 and then the camp 3 that we're heading toward the middle of the course, it took us 5 days to get to night 2 camp for the runners. And that's with, I believe at one point we had 32 or 34 pack animals, horses and mules. We had 22 or 23 crew members. The military was with us. We had doctors. So we're packing out a lot of stuff, a lot of food for the runners, gear. I mean, it was a wild logistical, it was incredible.
It sounds like quite the operation to have this thing even function at all. I'm curious because given that it sounds like you were, well, earlier on or about midway through with Camp 2, but at some of the more tougher and remote stages, were all the runners, like, what was their level of, I don't know, like fatigue as they were coming in? Were they all functioning? Did you worry about sending any of them out, I guess?
So safety, when Lewis and I were there in August and then preparing for the race in October, we told the organizing committee in Bhutan and all the racers and all of our crew members that safety was the number one priority. That we had the full support of the military, which included helicopters. So we had helicopters going in and out. If someone really got in trouble, we would extract them. We had 2 doctors at every camp, and every racer had to be checked the night before and the morning of before they left. And our doctors would turn people down and say, you cannot go the next day. Your oxygen levels are too low, or some people DNF themselves. So safety was a big concern. The first night going into Camp 1, they crossed over about a 16,500 foot pass and camped around 16,000 feet. And that was a long first day, and it was snowing, I think, when the runners arrived. So there were a lot of people dealing with just cold, exhausted, arriving after dark, just in front of the cutoff. So a few people turned around there and went out the next day. But yeah, safety was a key component. The military was amazing. They sent officers out in between the camps with radios. So we were constantly checking on the runners, in addition to using GPS trackers with track leaders as the website. And so really we could see live where everybody was.
What you're describing, it seems to me, is a fairly big departure from, I guess, what I'm used to, or in terms of like, if I am to say like quote unquote normal ultra running or like bike packing races, where there seems to be more of an attitude of like, you're out on your own, figure it out. Is that given the maybe danger or potential danger of this specific race?
Yeah, that plays a big part in it. This was the inaugural race, so obviously people have hiked this trail, but no one had really run it like this. And it was invitation only, and you had to be approved to run this race. So we had 22 international athletes and 8 Bhutanese athletes, and they were very well vetted. I mean, these people have extreme backgrounds in backcountry travel, or like they were the best of the best that we could get. But we still wanted to make sure that this was safe. Additionally, as the inaugural race, and with the purpose of really shining a light on climate change and shining a light on Bhutan itself, we went into it talking with a lot of the international runners that obviously this is a race, but it's also a celebration of Bhutan and nature and everything that they're doing to try and kind of right some of these wrongs. So all the runners ran hard. The Bhutanese ran really hard. But I think there was also just an approach each day of really being thankful and feeling blessed to be there and doing this as a roaming group of runners all celebrating the earth.
Now, and you mentioned like kind of the focus on climate change here, and I think I've read before that Bhutan is one of the countries where climate change is more visible than some of the others. Is that primarily with the glaciers receding, or is that in all aspects?
Yeah, Bhutan is it's an incredible place. I forget if it's 70% covered by forest still. They're one of the few countries in the world that is a carbon sink. They take on more or carbon than they produce. But being in the Himalaya and right there by these massive mountains and massive glaciers, they're seeing the changes really quick and up close and personal. And they're in the Lunana Valley where my camp was. I forget what year, but not too long ago, one of these glacial lakes burst through its barrier when it, more water ran off in the spring than normal, and it just created this massive cascade of water down the valley. And people live in this valley, and it killed many people, and it just wreaked havoc on this village and this community. So in Bhutan, they're seeing that. There's, we're so departed from that, being here in Santa Barbara, California. But the Bhutanese are seeing it every year up front.
That's interesting. And I was a little bit curious, has that specific trek changed over the years, given the climate change? Are the conditions different or more? I don't know if you had a chance to talk to the local guides to see if that's evolved.
That's a good question. What's interesting is, as it's an established trek, it's an established route, but man, these guides were amazing. It's not marked, or at least it wasn't. For the race, we did end up marking it much like the Appalachian Trail. There's 2-inch by 6-inch yellow blazes up there now that are indicating the snowman trek. But before we did that for the race, these guys just know the route, and it was amazing to watch them pick and choose. They're not looking at maps or anything. They just inherently know it. But some of the older guides, we would stop and have lunch, and they would just tell Lewis or me that if you look off in the distance here, you see that empty bowl right there. He was like, when I started doing this 25 years ago, there was a massive glacier there. So hearing that from the local people was pretty interesting.
It's got to be interesting and incredibly impactful too, to kind of hear their firsthand impact. And it's also probably kind of underscores maybe the concern that this is happening in somebody's lifetime. Now, so you were telling me you had the opportunity to meet with, now is it His Majesty or the King of Bhutan? I apologize that I don't know the proper nomenclature here.
He is the King of Bhutan. They call him HRH, His Royal Highness, I believe. But yeah, so this race was put on by the Kingdom of Bhutan, and we worked closely with the Tourism Council of Bhutan, and there was a secretariat, which was kind of the board of directors for the snowman race. And this was all UN ambassadors, really people high up in the business community in Bhutan. Some really talented, very interesting people were backing this event. But really, when it comes down to it, it was controlled by the King of Bhutan. So we finished the recon, and we had a board meeting that night, but HRH wanted to meet with us first, so we were actually driven into the palace. Me and Lewis, we at least showered, but we just got 2 weeks off the trail, and it was pretty wild. We were able to sit down in the palace, have a conversation. He's so connected with his people. He's an avid outdoorsman too. He's hiked the snowman trek, I think 4 times, and he spent a lot of time up in the highlands in Bhutan around Lunana and Laya, and he has a real affinity for the Highlanders. And he told us one of his main goals with this snowman race was to just shed a positive light on this community and these people, and not only share that with the world, all these photos and videos. We want to go around the world so people can see how unique Bhutan is, but he also wanted to share it with them and really let them know that they're unique and important and are an integral part of Bhutan as a kingdom. So that was just wild. I mean, I'm just a small town kid from Indiana. I live in my camper. I'm a freelancer, and somehow I'm sitting down with royalty. So I don't know how this is happening.
Well, at least he's an avid outdoorsman, so he could kind of know roughly the state that you're going to come in.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, it just seems like he's an amazing leader. I have so much respect for him and the country.
That must have been a great experience. Now, one of the things that I'm curious to hear about is that the focus, right, as you've kind of underscored several times, is on climate change. There's a couple different approaches, right, that you could take to that, and yet it seems like in order to highlight it, he chose an outdoor adventure. Do you know a little bit about what was the thinking or the strategy behind that?
Yeah, Lewis and I spent the 2 weeks out there hiking, and we were asking ourselves that exact question over and over. Like, how are we, why us? And when we sat down and had the conversation with him, Lewis specifically asked, you could have had scientists or hydrologists or people that are very knowledgeable and can really speak to what's happening with climate change. Why trail runners? Why us? And his response was that as trail runners and outdoors people, we spend so much time in nature. We love sharing nature, and we have a deep respect for nature that he thought this would be the best way to share this message. I think sometimes, we could feel like we're getting talked at by scientists, but trail runners are just sharing.
That's it. That's an interesting perspective, right? The ability to sort of bring the adventure and share the adventure with everyone, as well as too. I find that people who are in the outdoors a lot have like the kind of maybe front row seat to climate change from that perspective. So now, what does the future of this race look like? Is it going to be opened up to the broader public, invitation only, or even will it exist in the future?
So the plan
Sorry
is
to throw a ton of questions your way, by the way.
the plan is to have it again, hopefully this year. We're not there's a lot of key components to it. It was managed by the Kingdom of Bhutan. At some point, to make this maybe more sustainable, there might need to be some corporate backers, but at least for their inaugural event, they wanted it to be a Bhutanese event, and it was very successful. As being so remote and requiring so many logistics, I would foresee that it's probably going to continue to be some sort of invite only, and very limited. We only had 30 runners out there, but like I said, in my camp alone, we had almost 30 people supporting those 30 runners, and there were 4 camps plus the finish line. So there is so much that goes into it, but I do hope it continues on, and the Bhutanese peoples around my camp, it was in the Valley of Lunana. And I don't know if you've seen, there's a movie that came out recently in the last few years called A Yak in the Classroom, and it was filmed in Lunana, and it was it had a really successful showing. But this place that they highlight in the film, and then I was able to spend a few weeks of my life last year, the people were just amazing, and they loved the runners coming through. There's not a lot of people that live up there, but on that day when all the runners were out, all the people were out of their houses and their villages. They were all along the route cheering for people. So I think it was just a complete success in every aspect, and I'm looking forward to doing it again for sure.
That's exciting. I'm very curious to watch that movie. Now, the people in the village, do they have, like, despite living there, I would just be curious to hear, do they have much exposure to the outdoors in that way? Like, are they a community of trail runners, or how does that work?
I would say not necessarily, but they're very remote villages, so there's no road that goes up there. You can get up by helicopter. It'd be like 45 minutes to town, but a lot of people walk in and out, and it could be multiple days of walking. The Bhutanese runners that ran the race, they all finished, and they all finished very strong. Some of them were from the military, but some of them were just villagers from the highlands. And I believe the woman that won the female race, she finished and then made her way back up to her village. And in the next couple of days, she's back running around the hills, tending to her yak herd. Just her daily lifestyle is moving on foot at high elevation, and it made her really strong to come in and run an actual trail race, when in reality, she's probably just typically running after a bunch of yaks.
Wow. And I know, just kind of thinking through a ton of your adventures, and this one really kind of underscores it. I think maybe cutting yourself off, I'm struck as we're sitting here connected through technology, and you could kind of see me all hooked up and wired in. Do you enjoy that sense of remoteness and maybe kind of the ability to unplug yourself a little bit?
I do. I will say that those villages are also very connected. You have very good cell service up there. They're not connected to a power grid, but they've got solar power. I'd be sitting in a little house and they'd be watching TikTok or something like that. So they're very connected. I've found that on my adventures, on this hike specifically, when Lewis and I were doing the recon trek, it was all day on foot. So I'm disconnected then. I'm not on my laptop. I'm not editing websites. When I do bicycle touring, I like to just be out all day. Maybe I have to do a little bit of work in the evenings, but yeah, there is something about not being at a desk or at a computer for several days straight, even if you are still kind of connected.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, it's exciting to hear that the future of this race is happening, in some capacity and kind of expanding out. What does the future trips look like for you? Do you have kind of like a bucket list of items to go explore?
So I've always said I don't really have a bucket list. I have things that I definitely want to do, and a lot of it comes down to right time, right place. Right now I'm back in the United States. It's still kind of chilly everywhere that I've been lately. I kind of wish I was somewhere warmer. But I have some work here that I'm doing probably throughout to the beginning of summer. For this client that I'm working with right now, we have a big trade show in Germany that happens every 3 years. That'll be happening in October. So I'll probably be in Munich in October, and based on that, I'm thinking about maybe going to Europe early, maybe taking over a bike touring kit, buying a cheap bicycle, and just kind of riding around. I don't know. I'm kicking around a couple ideas, but I don't have any flights booked yet.
I like it. You're very much a little bit like inspired by the moment, or see where it takes you.
Yeah, well, working this trade show means that either my flight there or my flight back can be covered by work. So I think I'm inspired by getting some of my trips paid for.
Fantastic. You're strategic and adventurous. It's a powerful combination. Yeah, Chris, let's see here. Any closing thoughts? Anything that you're thinking through?
Not really. You did just mention something about the race, and I since this was what we were really talking about, the race is amazing. It probably will be for elite athletes only, but honestly, Bhutan is such a beautiful country. And if anyone is interested in that snowman trek, look that up. You don't have to do the full month. Even just the 2 weeks is again, a once in a lifetime experience. And they also just reopened the Trans-Bhutan Trail, which is not as high in the Himalaya, and it goes through a lot more villages. So you would get a lot more culture, and it'd be less of a strenuous hike. I have been considering that too. I would love to go do the Trans-Bhutan Trail. So if anyone's listening to this because it's kind of related to Bhutan and you're considering maybe going, I highly recommend it.
Now, let's. I was going to bring that up, now that you brought up the Trans-Bhutan Trail, I guess I was a little bit curious, maybe to jump slightly back into the snowman race again. That this race is so challenging. It seems like it would be only accessible, at least from a race standpoint, to a few. Like you said, the hike would be amazing to do over a longer period of time. Is there any interest in maybe the Trans-Bhutan Trail and opening that up to a wider public?
Possibly. I know we worked with the Tourism Council and some other athletic organizations in Bhutan, and they are really pushing running and racing to the local Bhutanese. So they're doing a lot more races and events in Bhutan. And it's actually, I believe the snowman trek kind of came out of there is a mountain bike race in Bhutan that's pretty popular. This has been going on for a long time. So they do have just a lot of outdoor adventure opportunities. And I think especially post-COVID, they're creating more and more opportunities for international people to come compete and explore and enjoy the country. So I think I could see Bhutan eventually becoming one of those endurance outdoor adventure destinations.
Right on. Well, I look forward to this year's race and hearing about all your future endeavors. Chris, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was great to hear your perspective of kind of shifting away from maybe a corporate or traditional lifestyle and how you made it work, as well as kind of the intricate nature of the snowman race. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it. It was fun.